The sand never leaves your skin. That is the first thing you need to understand. It works its way into every fold of cloth, every crease of your hands, every corner of your mouth, and no matter how many times you wipe your face on your linen sleeve, it comes right back. You are a servant inside the royal household of ancient Egypt. Not a slave in chains, not a prisoner, but something arguably more invisible, a person who exists entirely to make another human being's life function. A Pharaoh's servant, and the disturbing truth about what that actually meant, what your body endured, what your days looked like from the moment before dawn until long after the oil lamps guttered out, has been buried under thousands of years of golden imagery, painted walls, and cinematic fantasy. The version of Egypt you have seen your whole life, the gleaming collars, the perfumed corridors, the graceful figures moving through torch-lit temples. That version was designed by the very system you served. What the paintings never showed was you. Before the Pharaoh opened his eyes in the morning, you were already awake. Not gently awake, not gradually aware. You snapped into consciousness in the thick darkness before the sun cracked the horizon, because the consequence of being slow was not a reprimand or a written warning. It was a beating, a demotion, or worse, reassignment to outdoor labor in the full force of the Egyptian summer. You slept on a reed mat on a mud brick floor in a room shared with several other servants, and the air in that room was not the clean desert air you might romanticize. It was the concentrated smell of unwashed bodies, of old sweat soaked into fabric that had not been properly washed, of oil smoke from lamps that burned all night and coated the walls in a thin black residue. You did not have a mattress. You did not have a pillow, unless you counted the small wooden or stone headrest that kept insects from crawling into your ears while you slept. And yes, that was its practical purpose, not an aesthetic one. You put a curved piece of wood under your neck to keep your head elevated off the ground because the floor was alive at night. Your body was already broken in ways you simply accepted. Skeletal remains, recovered from workers' villages near Giza and across the Nile Valley, tell a story that the painted walls deliberately erase. Spinal compression in the lumbar region was so common among household servants and laborers that it appeared in individuals as young as their early 20s. Your knees showed wear consistent with spending hours crouching near ground level, grinding grain, washing vessels, or tending braziers. Your shoulders carried the asymmetrical muscle development of someone who hauled water jars on one side far more often than the other. You were not old. You were just used. Think about what it means to bend your back in the same direction, repeatedly, every single day, from the time you were a child until your body simply refused to cooperate. That was not an accident of old age. That was the architecture of your role. The grain grinding alone would destroy someone raised in the modern world within a week. Archaeological evidence from domestic sites along the Nile shows quernstones, heavy flat grinding stones, worn smooth from constant use, and the bones of the women who used them most show matching wear on their knees, lower backs, and the joints of their fingers. You knelt on the floor each morning and pushed grain across stone with your full body weight, back and forth for hours, turning emmer wheat into flour that was never quite clean. The flour always contained grit, not because the servants were careless, but because the stone itself shed microscopic particles into everything it ground. The teeth of ancient Egyptians, from royalty to servants, show catastrophic wear from this dietary grit, but yours were ground down faster because you also ate the bread you made, and your bread was not the refined, sweetened kind offered at the Pharaoh's table. Yours was dense, hard, and full of the same fine stone dust that was slowly wearing your molars to stumps by the time you were 30. Water was a daily obsession and a daily humiliation. The Nile provided life, but the Nile was also a working river, carrying sediment, animal waste, decomposing organic matter and the full biological output of every settlement upstream. You carried water in heavy ceramic jars from the river or from storage cisterns, balanced on your head or gripped against your hip, and you carried it multiple times a day. The weight of a full water jar was not trivial. It pressed down through your neck and spine with each step, and the path from water source to kitchen was not paved, not flat, and not short. You did not filter that water in any meaningful sense. You let sediment settle when you could, and when you could not, you drank what was there. The parasitic load in the average servant's body was something that would horrify a modern physician. Evidence from mummified remains shows widespread infection from parasites, including schistosoma, intestinal worms, and liver flukes. All of them transmitted through contact with Nile water that was used for everything: drinking, cooking, washing cloth, washing the body, washing the floors of the household you maintained. You had no way to know the connection between that water and the chronic pain in your abdomen, the fatigue that never fully lifted, the occasional blood in your waist. You assumed it was simply the condition of being alive. Inside the royal household, the hierarchy was invisible to outsiders, but merciless to everyone within it. Senior servants enforced discipline on junior ones with a directness that left marks. Papyrus records from administrative households document punishments for spilled oil, for arriving late to morning duties, for failing to maintain the correct temperature of food before it reached the dining area. These were not theoretical consequences. The rod was a real object used in real Egyptian administrative culture, referenced in wisdom texts and depicted in administrative scenes. And while images of its use inside domestic settings are rarer, the physical evidence on recovered skeletal remains from servant quarters tells a less careful story. Some bones show healed fractures consistent with blunt trauma. Some do not show healing at all. The smell of the Pharaoh's household was nothing like what you have imagined. The perfumes were real, cone-shaped wax scent cones worn on wigs during formal occasions, cedar oil and kaifi incense burned in religious spaces. But those existed in specific moments for specific people. The everyday smell of a large household with dozens of bodies, with food preparation, with live animals kept for offering and for consumption, with human waste managed by rudimentary pit systems, with linen that was washed in the river and sometimes not fully dried before being folded and stored, was the smell of organic life in a hot climate, with no refrigeration, no drainage, no ventilation systems, and no way to keep flies out of the meat. You cooked in a kitchen that was essentially an open fire in an enclosed space, and the smoke went up and also sideways and also directly into your face. Respiratory damage consistent with chronic smoke inhalation appears in the lung tissue of mummified remains from non-elite individuals. You breathed smoke the way you breathed air, constantly, unavoidably, and without understanding what it was slowly doing to the tissue inside your chest. Food reached the Pharaoh's table through an assembly line of human effort, and you were one link in that chain. By the time a roasted bird or a plate of figs arrived at the royal dining area, it had passed through multiple sets of hands, been tasted for poison by designated individuals, been kept warm by methods that required constant attention and constant proximity to heat, and had been arranged according to protocols that demanded the servant responsible for presentation know exactly what the correct configuration looked like without being told twice. A mistake in presentation was not a small social embarrassment. The Pharaoh was not a difficult boss. He was a living god whose displeasure carried a spiritual weight that the entire household felt, because your status, your safety, and your continued presence in this role all depended on the satisfaction of a single human being who had been told since birth that his mood was cosmically significant. Your body did not belong to you in any ordinary sense. Female servants inside royal and elite households were particularly vulnerable to demands that had nothing to do with grinding grain or carrying water. And the papyrus records that survive from household administration, combined with the careful silences in official inscriptions, suggest that the boundary between domestic service and sexual availability was not a boundary that the household's power structure felt obligated to maintain. You did not have a word for what you could not refuse. You had a role, and the role had no edges. Rest was theoretical. The concept existed in religious form. Certain feast days created pauses in labor, and religious calendars gave workers occasional days away from their standard duties. But inside the active household of a ruling pharaoh, those pauses contracted around the requirements of ritual, ceremony, travel, and the simple unpredictability of what a god-king might require at any given moment. You were on call in the way a soldier is on call, without the dignity of a soldier's title. Illness was managed by continuing to work unless you physically could not stand. Medical papyri from ancient Egypt show a sophisticated understanding of certain symptoms, and royal physicians were real, skilled, and sometimes remarkably accurate in diagnosis. But those physicians worked on the people who mattered. You treated your own infected skin wound with a poultice of honey and animal fat, and if the infection went deeper than the surface, you prayed to Sekhmet and kept working, because stopping work invited consequences that felt more immediately dangerous than the infection itself. The linen you wore was not cool and flowing the way it appears in tomb paintings. Clean white linen was expensive, labor-intensive to produce, and was kept clean through a process that included beating it on rocks at the river's edge, a process that gradually thinned and weakened the fabric. Your linen was off-white, sometimes grey, frequently stiff with old sweat deposits that the washing had not fully removed, and it absorbed the desert heat in a way that made your skin feel like it was wrapped in warm, damp cloth by midday. The sandals that appear so elegantly in illustrations were not universal. Many servants worked barefoot on stone and mud brick floors that stored the day's heat and released it upward through the soles of your feet throughout the afternoon hours. Foot injuries, infected cuts, and parasitic skin conditions from ground contact were common enough that they appear repeatedly in the medical literature of the period. By the time the sun began to drop and the household's formal activities shifted from active service to preparation for the night, your body had been in constant motion for close to 14 hours. The joints in your hands ached from wringing wet linen and lifting clay. Your lower back had passed through pain into a kind of numb baseline that you no longer consciously registered. Your eyes were irritated from smoke and dust and the reflective glare of white-plastered walls under a sun that Egypt never apologized for. You ate what was left from what you had prepared, which means you ate after the hierarchy had already taken its share, and what remained was sufficient to keep you functional, not comfortable. You lay back down on your reed mat while the oil lamp still burned, and you tried to sleep before it guttered out, because in the darkness before sleep there was briefly, mercifully, nothing required of you. Every morning you wash your face with tap water without thinking about it. You drink from a glass that was cleaned in filtered water in a machine and put away dry. You sleep on something soft and get up when an alarm tells you to, and if you are sick, you go to a doctor who is there for you. The distance between your ordinary Tuesday and an ordinary day inside that household in the Nile Valley 3,000 years ago is not a distance measured in time. It is measured in the entire architecture of what it means to live in a body that you control. The Pharaoh was a god. His servants were infrastructure. And the most disturbing truth about your daily life in that household is not how brutal it was. It is how completely invisible that brutality was designed to be, how thoroughly it was painted over in gold and lapis lazuli, and how many thousands of years it took before the bones in the ground started telling the story the walls refused to show. If there is a place, a civilization, a royal court, a sacred site, or a historical moment you have always seen through the polished version, tell me in the comments. I want to take you there without the filter.